So we're certainly looking forward to these conversations and to collaborating further. And now comes the time where we want to set the table for a big day. We've invited Susan Handy to come help us do this. I want to tell you a little bit about her. Susan is a distinguished professor of environmental science and policy from the University of California, Davis. She's the director of the National Center for Sustainable Transportation at that campus, where she also chairs a graduate program in transportation and technology and policy. Her research focuses on the relationships between transportation and land use, particularly in the impact of land use on travel behaviors and on strategies for reducing automotive dependence. Okay? Her group works in the Institute of Transportation Studies on the vehicle miles traveled, also known as VMT, land use and equity, or value, so notice what we did there, as well as the Bicycle Plus Research Collective. Her research projects have served the California Air Resources Board and Caltrans, exploring methods to evaluate the impact on vehicle travel of proposed land development and transportation projects. And last year, Susan released a new book on shifting gears. So you see the title, published by MIT Press, so please, do help me welcome Susan to today's.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thanks to Louise for the invitation to be here today. I'm so pleased and so honored to have this opportunity to kick off this, what I think is a really important event with my thoughts. And I think I'm even more pleased to have the opportunity to hear more about the work that you all are doing at your two campuses. I've already learned a lot and have seen that there's some really nice overlap between the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of work that we're doing. And so I'm looking forward to learning more tomorrow. And I also get the sense that your relationship is a little like our relationship with the other UC campuses. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Okay, so yes, I think this really is the question in transportation. How do we transition to a more sustainable and equitable transportation system? And I realized that I actually used the word transformation rather than transition. And I think that is really what we need, that it's even more ambitious. What we need is something more ambitious than just a transition. It really is a transformation of the system. So I've got 4 points I want to share with you tonight. And the first one I'm going to start with is just to simply acknowledge that we have built a pretty amazing transportation system. So we transportation professionals should be pretty proud of that. So California alone, my numbers are all California numbers. We have over 26,000 lane miles of freeways that are serving millions of licensed drivers and supporting and moving around millions of cars and trucks, and that are producing at least 310 billion vehicle miles of travel per year. I'm going to talk a lot about VMT. We also have some pretty incredible transit systems. We have over 200 transit systems in California, and a lot of people would argue that we should actually have quite a bit fewer transit systems because we need to do some merging of systems. But those systems are serving 1.3 billion trips per year, over 17 billion passenger miles of travel per year. And then our roughly 39 million people in California are making 6 billion walking and biking trips, and the transportation system is supporting that as well. Not to mention all of our ports, all of that freight travel on all of our freeways, and all of our major airports that lots of my colleagues spend time worrying about, and I don't think very much about, except for when I fly to places like Chicago, as I did today. So it really is a pretty extraordinary system. So let's just acknowledge that. But my second point, of course, is that it is also a problematic system in many ways. And of course, What is really problematic is that the system is so driving dependent. So if you look at the distribution of our person miles of travel across the modes, it is almost entirely about driving. And that is a problem for all kinds of reasons that I'm sure you already know. And it's not, of course, just California that is so car dependent, but most of the US and the trends around the world are towards greater car dependence. So we really need to think about the implications of that. And one of the big implications is sustainability, that our dependence on cars, and in particular on cars fueled by gasoline, are contributing to our climate change challenge. That transportation is one of the single biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the country, and the driving around of cars and trucks is the lion's share of the transportation emissions. So sustainability, a sustainability challenge. And of course, it's not just climate change. We have many other sustainability challenges tied to our transportation system. So air pollution, which of course we've made a lot of progress on thanks to a lot of technological innovation over many decades. The safety problem, where we were making some good progress for a while, but we've slipped in recent years. Congestion, saw some good examples of that right outside here on my walk over. The stress that comes with all of that. The fact that our system is not especially resilient, and that's going to become an increasing problem as the severity of climate events increases. Our transportation system has helped to shape a very sprawling pattern of land development that exacerbates all of this and has sustainability challenges of its own. Don't forget about wildlife, which is very much impacted by our transportation system. We have a road ecology center at UC Davis that is looking at some of those issues. And then, of course, equity, which we're going to talk a lot about in the next day. When driving went down in COVID, as it did, at least briefly, we got a taste of what it would be like to live with less driving. And of course, we never want to repeat that again, but it really, I think, helped to illustrate just how significant the impacts of the system are on our daily lives, and how wonderful it was when some of those impacts went away, when there wasn't so much congestion out there, when air quality got measurably better, when communities were noticeably quieter because there was less driving. The reduction, at least initially, in crashes and the injuries and fatalities that come with them. Wildlife had a great time. They were roaming around everywhere. We used our streets in different sorts of ways. And of course, greenhouse gas emissions went down. So it's a sustainability challenge. But it is also an equity challenge, our dependence on driving. Driving is really expensive. Owning and operating a vehicle is more expensive than ever. So that is a burden on all of us who are privileged enough to own a vehicle. Not everybody does own a vehicle, however. Nearly 10% of American households do not have their own vehicle. They are not well served by the transportation system that we have built. If you look at low-income households, households with incomes under $25,000, nearly 25% of those households don't own a vehicle. And again, how is our system serving their needs? But you can also flip that around and say, well, 75% of households with incomes under $25,000 do own a vehicle, which is a huge financial burden for those very low-income households. They do it, though, because they really don't have a choice. That in most parts of the U.S., you really need a car to be able to have a job, have and hold a job, and do the other things you need to do as a part of your daily life. And then, of course, even people who drive, not everybody has sort of equal freedom of movement, even when they are driving. And I'm sure you've heard about this problem, that Black and brown people in this country are far more likely to be stopped when they are driving and then cited when they are driving. And that is true also of when Black and brown people are walking and biking. One of my colleagues, Jesus Barajas, has done some work about Chicago and the disproportionate citing of bicyclists in Chicago by race. So this is restricting people's freedom of movement. It means even though we have this transportation system, it is not equitably serving everyone. And then this is another important area of study, is what happens on transit systems, and the fact that women often, again, don't feel that same freedom of movement, especially while riding transit. So these are issues that need to be addressed. And my third point is that now is the time to do it, that now is the time for transformation, that we really can't wait any longer. Climate, obviously, we are at a very critical moment, and we've been working on it, but we've got to do more, that we haven't achieved the kind of reductions that we're going to need to avert the climate crisis that is coming and is arguably already here. California has been working on this for going on 2 decades now under the leadership of the California Air Resources Board. So this is the state's plan, hope, vision for where we're headed with respect to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that we have seen some decline in greenhouse gas emissions since the state has adopted policies to address this. But you can also see that we have a really long way to go to get to where we need to be to avert a worse crisis. And again, you can see that transportation is the big share of this. We have an affordability crisis in transportation. As I said, driving is more expensive than ever. Gas is not actually $7 in California right now, but it is over $5 a gallon in California right now. There have been news reports about how car insurance is more expensive than ever. Cars themselves are more expensive than ever, meaning that people are having to spend a huge share of their income to be able to afford a car, to own and operate a car. I'm sure you've heard about the problems in transit, in the transit industry. COVID, transit agencies took a huge hit under COVID as ridership fell off when people weren't going to work. And as people have come back to work, transit is rebounding somewhat, but not to the extent that it really needs to. And so that affects the fare box recovery for transit agencies. For a while, transit agencies were surviving on money from the federal government as well as state governments to make up for that loss in fares, but that money is now running out. And transit agencies all around the country are at the point of collapse, that we don't know how we're going to keep these transit services running. We also have a safety crisis. As I said, we've been making a lot of progress on improving the safety of the system, never as much progress as we needed. But again, COVID seems to have done something so that some of the recent progress has been erased, and in particular, safety for bicyclists and pedestrians has gotten much worse since COVID. Now, again, we've been working on this. California, I think, more than just about anyone. And you might say that this could be the beginning of a transformation. So California has adopted It's Advanced Clean Cars Rule, or number 2 rule, where we've set very ambitious targets for completely converting to electric vehicles within not such a distant future. And so this is really important policy that is pushing change and helping us with our climate goals. California is also working on what I see as the much harder part of the equation, which is thinking about how do we reduce some of that vehicle miles of travel. Because all of the analysis shows that while electric vehicles are essential for getting us to the kind of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that we need, that's not going to be enough, that we also need to reduce how much people are driving. So the state has adopted a couple of really important policies, one that put in place targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions that put the burden for that on the metropolitan planning organizations around the state, and another policy that's shifting the focus away from what we transportation people call level of service, which is a measure of congestion, and putting the focus on the goal of reducing vehicle miles of travel. So this is good. This is a start of a transition. It could potentially be the start of a transformation. And I think it is promising in that there does seem to be some momentum for change. So for example, in Los Angeles, there was a freeway expansion that had been proposed for decades that the state decided to drop, that they made this decision that this was not something that the state should be building. The voters of Los Angeles approved Measure M back in 2016. 71% of the voters approved this measure that increased sales taxes for transportation, with most of that money going into transit rather than highways. So there are some promising signs that we are in the beginning stages of some kind of a transition. And I think that's another reason why we've got to think about now as the time for transformation, that we've got to take advantage of whatever momentum is out there to really push policies as far and as fast as we can. And then that brings me to my 4th point, which is the point that transformation is going to take a shift in thinking and not just doing. Or more to the point, we're not going to get very far or very much farther in transforming the system if we do not also transform how we think. And so that's what I want to talk about for the rest of my time, is some of the thinking I've been doing about how we think about transportation. And when I say that we need to transform how we think, I mean, when I say we, I mean everybody, right? It's the public, it's the politicians, and it's the profession. And I've been particularly interested in examining how it is that the profession itself thinks about transportation, since they're the ones who are out there doing this work on a daily basis, that we really need to, we as a profession really need to step back and do some serious thinking and reflection on how we are approaching all of these questions. So first, I just should say a little bit about who is the transportation profession. What do I mean by that? And of course, the boundaries are very fuzzy here. And I mostly think about kind of the roadway system and our daily travel. So that's the part of the profession I'm focused on, as opposed to the freight people and the airport people. But clearly, the profession includes all those folks who are working for our public agencies at all levels of government, local, regional, state, and federal, the associations that those people belong to, the consulting firms that are often hired by the public agencies, and who else have I got here? Oh yeah, and I throw the universities in here as well. I think the academics we hope that we have an important role to play in influencing all of this professional practice. So I certainly consider myself a part of this profession. So if you take a close look at what we do as a transportation profession, and you sort of look beneath that, you find a set of core ideas that really, I think, explain why we're doing what we're doing, why we've been doing what we've been doing for going on a century. And these ideas, if you add those all up, it's really about the goal of making it easier to drive. You can find these ideas embedded in these important guidance documents that dictate a lot of what the transportation professionals do. So we have the Highway Capacity Manual, which is all about how do we measure congestion and think about the need for capacity expansion. We have the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which sets all the rules about how we control traffic and speed limits and things like that. There's what we call the Green Book, because the cover is green. It's the Policy on Geometric Design of Highways and Streets, which again is the guidance on how we should be designing all of these facilities. And this is really important because, the transportation system is obviously shaped by a whole bunch of policies and decisions that these professionals and the politicians they work with are making. And those policies and decisions are very much shaped by these standard practices, these guidelines, and the various sorts of tools that the professionals use. But what's embedded in those is a professional way of thinking. It's these sets of ideas that the profession in some way holds. And, obviously individuals hold on to ideas, but you sort of put all those individuals together and you get this collective way of thinking. So that's what I examine in my book. And the reason I bring it up here is because if we want to get to a different transportation system over here, we've really got to trace it backwards, or as I think of it, trace it upstream and think about what is the thinking that is producing that system. And if we want a different system, we need some different thinking underlying all of this. So the question I ask is professional thinking now shifting? Because that would be a good thing. That's going to be a necessary thing to achieve the transition and the transformation that we so desperately need. And in fact, there are a lot of different ideas out there. So for each one of these traditional ideas, there is an alternative idea that is held by at least some people within the profession. And in fact, these alternative ideas, most of them are not at all new, that they in some cases have been around as long as the traditional ideas. It's just that they have never been become as fully embraced by the profession, and they have not been embedded in professional practice the way the traditional ideas have been. And if you add up these alternative ideas, you get something that is more about making it easier and safer to not drive, rather than the traditional focus on making it easier to drive. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I do want to take you through a few of these ideas and kind of explain what I'm thinking here. And we've already talked about congestion, so that's a really good place to start, because if you talk to people, go to a party and say you're a transportation planner, what do people do? They complain about congestion. Okay. So the kind of the technical way to talk about congestion is mobility. Like, mobility is the goal. Mobility, ease of movement. The converse is congestion, right? When you have congestion, you have poor mobility. So the corollary to the goal of mobility is the idea that congestion is bad. And we have in this country what I think of as a congestion obsession. And we may need to discuss this, but Yes, we really don't like congestion. And this is not a recent thing. The concern with congestion goes back even farther back than the profession goes back. Wonderful work by Asha Agrawal-Weinstein, who's now at San Jose State, looked at some of the history of public attitudes towards congestion. You know, as early as 1900, people are complaining about congestion. Marty Wax did this wonderful report on a century worth of efforts to fight congestion in Los Angeles. So this is by no means a new obsession. And of course, there's a good reason for this obsession, because congestion is awful. Nobody likes to be stuck in traffic, and there are very measurable, real effects of congestion, like commuter stress, which affects our health, which affects worker productivity. Congestion leads to lost economic activity, and so on and so on. And so, you know, we get people who are quantifying, you know, what's the economic loss of all of that congestion. And when you do that, it looks pretty darn enormous. Okay, so good reason to be obsessed with congestion. And then, as I said earlier, we measure congestion using this concept called level of service, or LOS. Very important in transportation planning, local level, regional level. Level of service, in very simple terms, is a function of volume to capacity. So if you have more volume of driving relative to the capacity of the system, you're going to have a higher level of congestion. And this measure has been a big driver of, no pun intended, of our transportation decisions, our decisions about the system. And so, of course, if congestion, you know, if level of service is bad, congestion is high, and it's a function of volume to capacity, what do we do to fix the problem? Well, traditionally, what we have done is focus on expanding capacity. So that's another one of these core traditional ideas, is that it is the job of the transportation professional to provide enough capacity to accommodate all of that demand for driving. We call this the predict and provide approach, and we've been doing this since the 1950s. In fact, Chicago was kind of the starting point for this approach, where we develop these models that predict what is congestion going to look like in the future, and then that tells us where we need to add capacity to get our level of service back to acceptable levels. And just to reaffirm that this really is an embedded idea in the profession, is this recent quote from Texas. I like to pick on Texas because I lived there for many years, where the executive director of the Texas Department of Transportation, in talking about a current proposed widening of I-35 through the middle of Austin, says that the work will never conclude on I-35 through Austin. In other words, as the region continues to grow, we will simply continue to expand the highway system. It never ends. All right, well, that idea, that approach, ignores the phenomenon that we call induced travel, where a capacity expansion, yes, it does accommodate growth, any growth that's happening in the region, but that expansion itself generates additional growth in driving. And it's kind of a simple economic supply and demand sort of explanation. It is something that transportation officials have recognized pretty much from the start, that as we expand the system, we are generating additional driving. It's not just about accommodating the growth that would otherwise occur. It is, in fact, creating additional driving. By now, we have lots of robust research that demonstrates this effect, and that's not work that my group has done, but what we've done is done a lot of review of that research and synthesis of it, and have turned that the results out of that research in the form of an elasticity between VMT and highway expansion into a little tool that people can use to calculate how much increase in driving would you expect for a given capacity expansion. And I will just tell you that this little tool that we've created is causing quite the stir in planning circles in California, and I'm happy to talk about that story offline at some point. Okay, so maybe we should be rethinking freeways. And as I've already said, LA, they canceled a proposed freeway, so that suggests a little bit of rethinking. They've recently announced what they're going to do with the funding from that canceled freeway. It was actually local funding, a lot of it, so they can repurpose that funding in a way that you can't repurpose federal funding for highways, which is a part of the problem. And then you can see the kinds of things they're doing with the money, which is putting it into transit and bicycle and pedestrian sorts of things. But there's still quite a bit of highway improvement, as they call it, as a part of this package. Just today, there was a very important meeting of the California Transportation Commission where they most likely approved funding for what's called the YOLO 80 Corridor Improvement Project. YOLO is Yolo County, not YOLO, which is where Davis is. So this freeway goes right through Davis and links Davis to Sacramento. And they're going to widen that freeway. It probably will be managed lanes, where you can pay a toll if you're a carpool, or no, if you're a carpool, you get to go for free. If you're not a carpool, you can pay a toll. So that reflects some additional thinking. But the fact that in California, where we have policy about reducing vehicle miles of travel, we are still expanding highways, suggests that we still have quite a ways to go. And of course, our obsession with congestion is also tied to our love of speed. And there's psychology that shows, yes, humans love the thrill of speed. But professionally, we define speed as efficiency. We as a profession, we're trying to minimize travel times and get people to where they're going as quickly as possible. Hence, our obsession with congestion, which is slowing us down. But of course, speed, while it means better efficiency, has really serious implications for safety, and not only for people in vehicles, but especially for people outside of vehicles. So we do try and control speed, and we use speed limits to do that, but you ever heard of this 85th percentile rule? That's how we are setting speed limits, which in essence means that how fast drivers are driving determines what the speed limit is going to be, so that drivers are setting the speed limit, rather than we as communities saying, this is how fast we want people to go, and we're going to set the speed limits accordingly. So a lot of communities, you see these 20 is plenty campaigns to try and reduce the speed limit and get people to slow down. A big part of the problem here is how we've been designing our roads, which is all focused on, well, a lot about efficiency, but it's also thinking about safety in a particular way, in the form of making roads wider and straighter to reduce the risk of crashes. But of course, wider and straighter means faster speeds, which means when you do have crashes, they're going to be more severe. So we've got this real problem with the tension between efficiency and safety, with speed at the heart of that. We make up for bad design with traffic calming, which is an idea that's been around for a long time. It's really about fixing the bad design of our local streets to try and slow cars down. But maybe, we should be thinking about the idea that slow could actually be a good thing. And I think one little silver lining out of COVID is that it did get us thinking about our streets and our use of street space, and that maybe slower streets would be a good thing, and that maybe we don't have to go quite so fast. This picture on the right, this is two of my former students who are now out there being transportation professionals, and they happened to meet up on the train between Sacramento and the Bay Area. And of course, they had to take a selfie and send it to me because they were so excited. But, this wouldn't happen if they were in their separate cars on the highway, right? There are benefits to our slower modes that maybe it's time we started to appreciate those more. Okay, just a couple of other quick points I want to make. I think another really tough problem for us, a very sticky idea, is that technology is going to solve all our problems. The public loves this idea, the politicians really love this idea, but the professionals love this idea too. And I think of it as we can have our cake and eat it too solution to our problems, right? That if technology fixes things, then we don't have to change our behavior, and that'll be a whole lot easier. Technology has certainly helped us with lots of our problems, so air quality, safety, technology has been really important. And then electric vehicles, of course, are a really important part of our sustainability effort. But we do need to be thinking carefully about the technologies that are soon to be here and think about how do we want to incorporate those technologies into the system, and can we do it in a way that helps us towards this goal of improved sustainability and improved equity. And I'm particularly concerned about autonomous vehicles, which maybe is another topic for conversation tomorrow. But anyway, just a reminder that as we think about future mobility, it is up to us. We can shape that. The technologies that are coming along don't have to dictate what the system becomes. We need to get ahead of it and really think about how those technologies should be incorporated. So we can go driverless, or we can go driverless. Just keep that in mind. And then the final idea, which is actually where I start the book, is about freedom and the idea that the car equates to freedom. That's a very American idea. And it is, it's true. If you're lucky enough to own a car and be able to afford it and not have to worry about being racially profiled when you're out there driving, the car is freedom, but financial burden, and it doesn't serve everybody. So we really need a more expansive way to think about this. And that's, I think, where the concept of mobility justice is so important, that can give us a much broader way to think about really what is at the heart of this transportation thing that we're trying to do. Okay, so yes, I think ideas are shifting within the profession. I've seen some movement from some of these traditional ideas and some adoption of the alternative ideas. Some of these shifts have gone farther than others. Some are more robust than others, but it is promising, and it gives me a bit of hope. It makes me think maybe we are on the cusp of a paradigm shift in U.S. transportation planning and policy, shifting from the old way of making it easier to drive to a new way of making it easier to not drive. But I've been using this slide for at least 10 years, so maybe not entirely hopeful. I tried this exercise one day, sort of mapping out the acceptance level. This is totally unscientific, so don't quote me, but the old ideas in blue, adopted very early on and really dominated the profession for a long time. The alternative ideas have been around for a long time, but just didn't have that same sort of acceptance level, but that's picking up. But what do you notice at the end? What do we really need to see is those lines crossing, right? And so I think what's going on is a lot of these alternative ideas are gaining credence, and you hear a lot of talk about them, but it doesn't mean that we're letting go of the old ideas. And the example of this I use all the time comes from just west of where I am in Davis, over in Marin and Sonoma, where we've been investing millions in a new rail system to link Sonoma and Santa Rosa down to the ferry that takes you to San Francisco. Really significant investment. But at the same time, we're widening the highway. And these things parallel each other perfectly. And that concerns me because we're really not giving a fair chance to the transit investments we're making if we continue to do the old thing of expanding highways. So we need to, I think, in my opinion, not just embrace the new ideas, but let go of the old ideas. And that's a very hard thing to do. And that's especially a hard thing to do with this congestion obsession. And I can say more about that if you're interested. But I also want to, we also need to remind everybody that in addition to the congestion problem, yes. So I call this the throw everything at it mentality, the it being congestion, right? So what we're doing is trying to do everything we can to reduce congestion. And I think we're doing some things that are sort of self-defeating. And then we need to remind people that it's not just about congestion, that we have many, many other challenges that are arguably equally, if not more important than addressing congestion. So let's not forget about those, and let's make sure that from a policy standpoint, we're giving them the attention that they deserve. Okay, so that's it. My points, we have a pretty amazing transportation system. It is also problematic in many ways. We really can't wait to do something about it. The time for transformation is now. That's because the problems are so significant, but also because there may be a little window that we can take advantage of to make some really significant change. And then what it's going to take is some really significant change in that underlying thinking. And that's a really hard thing to do. So I hope that this has given you some food for thought and sparked some thinking that might help shape the discussion tomorrow. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you all are thinking yourselves. So thank you.